My aunt took me in at 14 and used me as her free labor. Now she wants me to quit my job to be her full-time caregiver? My parents died in a car accident when I was 14. My Aunt Julia was my only family left. She swooped in at the funeral talking about duty and blood. Said she'd give me a home. What she really wanted was free childcare. The day I moved in, she handed me a schedule. Wake up at 5:30 to make breakfast for her 3 kids. Pack their lunches, walk them to school, pick them up, help with homework, cook dinner, clean the house, bathe the youngest, get them to bed by 9, then do my own homework in the kitchen until midnight. I wasn't her niece. I was unpaid labor. She never introduced me as family. I was the girl who helps out. Her kids called me by my first name, never cousin. At school events, she'd tell people I was staying with them temporarily. I ate separately after the family finished, got their leftovers, and slept in the unfinished basement on a mattress on the floor. When I turned 16 and wanted to get a job, Julia said no. The kids needed me. When I applied for college scholarships, she refused to give me tax information. Said I should focus on the household. But I found a way. My guidance counselor helped me file as an independent student. Got a full ride to State University for engineering. Julia was furious. Who would watch her kids? I left the day after graduation and never looked back. I worked in the library, tutored math, did whatever it took. Graduated with honors. Got recruited by a tech company. Started at $95,000. By 25, I was making $150,000. By 30, I was a senior engineer at a Fortune 500 company pulling in $300,000 with stock options. Bought a condo downtown, traveled the world, built a life. Julia never called. Not once in 16 years. I heard things through mutual acquaintances. Her oldest became a nurse. The middle child worked retail. Youngest had 3 kids by 3 different men. Julia's husband left her 5 years ago. She got half his pension. Lived alone in the same house. Then last month she called me at work. My assistant said it was urgent family business. Julia had been diagnosed with diabetes. Also had bad knees. Needed help around the house. She'd thought about it and decided I should move back home. Take care of her like she took care of me. I'd proven I could handle household duties. She even had the basement ready for me. Same basement, now with a space heater. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She'd already told her doctor I'd be her caregiver. Listed me on medical forms. Told neighbors I was coming home to help. She said I could work remotely from her house. Tech jobs were flexible these days. I'd have time to manage her medications, drive her to appointments, cook her special diabetic meals, and maintain the house. Just like old times, but reversed. When I said absolutely not, she got nasty. Reminded me that without her, I'd have ended up in foster care. Probably never would have gone to college. Definitely wouldn't have my fancy job. I owed my entire life to her sacrifice. The least I could do was return the favor. She started calling daily. Left voicemails about how she was struggling, couldn't afford a nurse. Her kids were too busy with their own families. I was single, no kids, just work. What else did I have going on? She gave me 4 years. I could spare a few years for her. Then she escalated. Called my company's HR department. Told them I was her registered caregiver and needed family medical leave. HR called me, confused. I had to explain I hadn't lived with this woman in 16 years. She showed up at my condo building. Told the doorman she was my sick aunt who needed help. He almost let her up before calling me. She sat in the lobby for 3 hours telling anyone who'd listen about her ungrateful niece who abandoned family. Next, she called Adult Protective Services. Reported that I was neglecting a dependent family member. A social worker actually came to my office. I had to prove I had no legal obligation to this woman. Julia even sent me an invoice. 4 years of room and board at market rates, food costs, utilities, even added interest. Total came to $73,000. Said we could call it even if I came back for 5 years of caregiving. I was done playing nice. I hired a lawyer. Not for defense, for offense. Turns out using a minor for unpaid labor violates several laws, making a child work instead of allowing them employment. Educational interference, potentially child abuse for the basement situation. My lawyer sent Julia a letter. Melody's letter went out certified mail the next morning. 3 pages of legal letterhead outlining violations I'd never thought to name. Child labor laws that Julia broke by making me work instead of letting me get a real job. Educational interference when she refused to provide tax documents for college. Housing code violations for keeping a minor in an unfinished basement with no heat or proper ventilation. The letter demanded Julia stop all contact immediately. No calls, no visits, no messages through third parties. It warned that continued harassment would result in formal legal action, including restraining orders and potential criminal referrals to authorities. Melody explained that we weren't actually planning to file criminal charges unless Julia forced our hand, but the threat alone might be enough to make her back off. I signed the authorization form and watched Melody seal the envelope. Part of me felt powerful for the first time since Julia's first phone call. Another part felt sick, like I was attacking someone who'd taken me in when I had nowhere else to go. But then I remembered the basement mattress and eating cold leftovers at the kitchen counter after everyone else finished dinner, and the sick feeling shifted to something harder. The letter would reach Julia in 2 or 3 days. I spent those days jumping every time my phone rang, checking my email constantly, looking over my shoulder in the parking garage. Julia had proven she could show up anywhere, do anything. A legal letter might make things worse instead of better. What if she showed up at my condo again, angrier this time? What if she contacted my boss directly instead of just HR? What if she told everyone at my company that I was a terrible person who abandoned sick family? I kept my phone on silent during meetings because I couldn't handle the anxiety of seeing her name pop up. 2 days after Melody sent the letter, my desk phone started ringing. I ignored the first call because I was in the middle of debugging code. Then it rang again, and again. By the 5th call, I checked the caller ID, Julia's number. I let it go to voicemail. The phone rang 3 more times before stopping. Then my cell phone started. I blocked the number. She called from a different number. I blocked that one too. Within 3 hours, Julia had called my work line 17 times. My cell phone showed 12 blocked calls from various numbers. I was starting to panic when Julia from HR called my extension. Julia's voice was calm and professional. She explained that Julia had also been calling the main company line trying to reach me. The receptionist had flagged it after the 4th call in an hour. HR was documenting everything. They'd added Julia's known numbers to a blocked list in the phone system. Any calls from her would be automatically rejected and logged as evidence of harassment. Julia asked if I needed any additional support or if I felt unsafe at work. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt protected by someone other than my lawyer. My company was actually helping me instead of just staying neutral. I thanked Julia, and she told me to forward any other contact attempts directly to her. She'd handle it from there. That evening, I sat in a therapist's office for the first time in my life. Carly had availability on short notice after Melody referred me. The office was small and warm with soft lighting and plants everywhere. Carly was maybe 50 with gray hair and kind eyes. She asked me to start from the beginning, so I did. I told her about my parents dying and Julia taking me in. The schedule she handed me on day 1. The years of childcare and housework and sleeping in the basement, going to college and never looking back, building my career. Then Julia's phone call last month demanding I quit my job and move back to take care of her. I talked for 40 minutes straight without stopping. Carly just listened and took notes and nodded. When I finally finished, she asked how I felt about those 4 years with Julia. I said I'd always been grateful she took me in instead of letting me go to foster care. Carly tilted her head and asked if gratitude was really what I felt, or if it was what I thought I should feel. That question broke something open in my chest. I realized I'd spent 16 years telling myself I was lucky, that Julia had saved me, that I owed her everything. But sitting in that office saying it all out loud to someone who had no stake in the story, I heard how wrong it sounded. A 14-year-old kid doing 60 hours a week of unpaid labor wasn't lucky. She was exploited. Carly helped me understand something I'd never let myself think before. Gratitude and abuse can exist in the same space. Julia did take me in when I had nowhere else to go. That was real. But she also violated labor laws and treated me like hired help instead of family. That was also real. One fact didn't cancel out the other. Julia's decision to house me didn't give her the right to work me like an adult employee without pay. It didn't excuse making me sleep in an unfinished basement or excluding me from family meals or refusing to help with college applications. Taking in your orphaned niece and then exploiting her labor for 4 years isn't generosity. It's something else entirely. Carly said that realization was the first step toward processing what had actually happened to me. I'd spent 16 years viewing my adolescence through Julia's lens. Now I needed to look at it through my own. I left that session feeling shaky but also clearer than I'd felt in weeks. 3 days after Julia received Melody's letter, building security called me at work. Julia was in the lobby. She'd told the front desk she needed to see me urgently about a family emergency. Security had called up before letting her access the elevators like they were supposed to. I told them I wasn't available and asked them to tell Julia to leave the building. The security guard said he'd relay the message and hung up. I stared at my computer screen trying to focus on work, but my hands were shaking. Julia was 23 floors below me right now. She'd read the legal letter threatening criminal charges, and her response was to show up at my workplace anyway. I pulled up the security camera feed that employees could access for the lobby. There she was, standing near the reception desk with her purse clutched in both hands. She looked smaller than I remembered, older. but her face had that same determined set to it that I remembered from when she'd tell me I couldn't go to the school events because the kids needed me home. Julia didn't leave. Security approached her twice on camera, and I watched her shake her head both times. Then she started talking to people in the lobby. Business people waiting for meetings. Delivery workers dropping off packages. Anyone who would listen. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could see people's faces change from polite attention to discomfort. Some walked away quickly. Others seemed sympathetic. One woman patted Julia's arm. I felt sick watching it. She was telling them her version of the story. The poor sick aunt abandoned by her ungrateful niece, the girl she'd raised who now refused to help in her time of need. I'd worked so hard to build my professional reputation here. Now Julia was in the lobby telling strangers I was a terrible person. After an hour, building security called the police. I watched 2 officers arrive and talk to Julia. She showed them something on her phone. Probably medical documents or the fake invoice she'd sent me. The officers talked to security, then back to Julia. Finally, they escorted her toward the exit. She went but slowly, still talking the whole way. I stood at my office window on the 23rd floor and watched her emerge onto the sidewalk below. She looked up at the building like she knew exactly where I was. Then she walked to her car and drove away. Melody filed for a temporary restraining order that afternoon. I forwarded her the security footage and the log of Julia's 17 phone calls. Melody said we had a strong case for harassment. The workplace disruption was particularly damaging because it showed Julia was willing to interfere with my employment. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. That meant I'd have to see Julia in court, sit in the same room as her, listen to her tell a judge why she should be allowed to keep contacting me. The thought made my stomach hurt, but Melody said it was necessary. We needed the legal protection of a restraining order. Julia had proven she wouldn't stop on her own. That weekend, a certified letter arrived at my condo. Return address showed a law office I didn't recognize. Inside was a letter from Julia's new attorney threatening to sue me for elder abuse and neglect. The letter claimed I had a moral and legal obligation to care for my elderly aunt who had raised me. It said Julia's health was declining due to my refusal to help. It demanded I either agree to provide caregiving or face a lawsuit seeking damages for medical expenses and emotional distress. I read it twice, trying to understand how Julia thought this would work. Then I forwarded it to Melody. She called me back within an hour, laughing. Not a polite laugh, but a real one. She said Julia's lawyer was either incompetent or desperate. There was no legal basis for forcing an adult niece to provide elder care. No court would award damages for someone refusing to quit their job and move in with a relative. The letter was pure intimidation with zero legal merit. Melody said it actually helped our case because it showed Julia's harassment was escalating even after receiving our cease and desist letter. We'd bring it to the restraining order hearing as additional evidence. I spent Sunday afternoon with my laptop open, typing out everything I could remember from age 14 to 18. The schedule Julia had given me that first day. Wake up at 5:30, make breakfast for 4 people, pack 3 lunches, walk the kids to the school, pick them up, help with homework, cook dinner, clean the house, bathe the youngest, get everyone to bed by 9, then start my own homework around 10 and work until midnight or later. I wrote about the basement with its concrete floor and single mattress. How cold it got in winter before Julia finally bought a space heater my junior year. I wrote about eating separately from the family, always after they'd finished, getting whatever was left over. About being introduced as the girl who helps out, never as family. About Julia refusing to give me tax information for college applications because she said about missing school events and activities because I had to watch the kids. Every memory made me angrier. Not the hot, explosive anger, but something colder and harder. I'd been 14 years old, a kid who'd just lost both parents. And Julia had looked at me and seen free labor, someone to exploit while pretending it was generosity. Writing it all down made it real in a way it hadn't been when it was just memories I tried not to think about. By the time I finished, I had 12 pages of documentation, specific details with dates and examples. Melody had told me this kind of evidence would be useful if Julia tried to paint herself as the victim in court. Now I had proof of exactly what those 4 years had actually looked like. Monday morning, I opened my laptop to find a LinkedIn message from someone named Sabine Farley. The profile photo showed a woman in scrubs standing outside a hospital, Julia's oldest daughter. I stared at the notification for a full minute before clicking it. The message was long. She said she'd heard through the family network about what Julia was doing to me. She wanted to apologize for how Julia treated me when I lived there. She said she'd been in college during most of those years and didn't fully understand what was happening. But looking back now as an adult, she could see it was wrong. She also said she'd refused to help Julia with her current health situation. Julia had tried the same controlling behavior with her throughout her 20s. Tried to dictate where Sabine should work, who she should date, how she should spend her money. It took Sabine years of therapy to set boundaries. She wouldn't let Julia back into her life in that way. She ended the message saying if I needed someone to talk to who understood Julia's patterns, she was willing to meet. I forwarded the message to Melody before responding. Melody called me 20 minutes later. She said Sabine's testimony could strengthen our case significantly. It showed Julia had a pattern of controlling behavior with multiple family members, not just me. If Sabine was willing to provide a written statement, it would demonstrate that Julia's current actions fit a long history of manipulation. I messaged Sabine back and suggested coffee that weekend. She responded within an hour with a cafe name and time. Saturday afternoon, I met Sabine at a quiet place near the hospital where she worked. She looked tired but smiled when she saw me. We ordered drinks and sat by the window. She started talking before I could figure out what to say. She told me Julia had always been controlling, but it got worse after her husband left. Julia tried to manage every aspect of Sabine's nursing career, called her supervisor to complain about her schedule, showed up at the hospital unannounced to check if Sabine was really working, demanded access to Sabine's bank accounts to help her budget better. When Sabine got engaged, Julia tried to take over the wedding planning completely. Sabine finally cut contact for 2 years until Julia agreed to respect boundaries. Then Sabine talked about her siblings. Quentin kept his distance because Julia criticized every job he took and every relationship he had. Julia told him he was wasting his potential working retail, said his girlfriend wasn't good enough for the family. Quentin eventually stopped telling Julia anything about his life, and Nadine, the youngest, had it worst. Julia pressured her to have kids even though Nadine was barely making rent. Said family legacy was important. Said Nadine owed it to her to have grandchildren. When Nadine got pregnant the first time, Julia was thrilled. But then she tried to control every parenting decision. Nadine ended up with 3 kids by 3 different men, all relationships that fell apart partly because Julia interfered so much. Now Nadine worked 2 jobs and could barely keep up. Julia still called demanding Nadine visit more and bring the kids over. Sabine said their father left because Julia tried to control his retirement plans. He wanted to travel and downsize the house. Julia refused both. She needed the house for family gatherings. She needed him home to help maintain the property. He filed for divorce and moved to Florida within 6 months. I sat there taking it all in. Julia's exploitation of me wasn't an isolated incident. It was her fundamental way of relating to people. Sabine reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She said she was sorry she didn't protect me back then. She'd been so focused on escaping herself that she didn't realize how bad it was for me. I told her it wasn't her fault. She was just a kid herself, trying to survive Julia too. Monday morning, I forwarded Sabine everything we'd discussed in a long email. She responded with a detailed written statement about Julia's controlling behavior with all her children and her ex-husband. She included specific examples with dates, times Julia showed up at her workplace, the wedding planning takeover, the pressure on Nadine to have kids, the control over their father's retirement. She ended by saying she believed Julia was attempting the same pattern with me, and that a restraining order was necessary to protect me from ongoing harassment. I sent it all to Melody. She called me that afternoon sounding energized. She said Sabine's statement was exactly what we needed. It showed the court that Julia's behavior wasn't about genuine medical need or family concern. It was about control and manipulation, which Julia had exercised over multiple family members for years. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. Melody said we had a strong case now. Julia's workplace harassment, the false APS report, the building lobby incident, and now evidence of a decades-long pattern of controlling behavior. She told me to prepare myself emotionally, because Julia would likely show up looking as sympathetic as possible. The hearing would be in family court downtown. I should dress professionally but not too formally. Most importantly, I should stay calm no matter what Julia or her lawyer said. Thursday morning, I put on a navy dress and drove to the courthouse. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Melody met me in the lobby and walked me through what would happen. Julia's lawyer would argue against the restraining order. Melody would present our evidence. The judge would make a decision, probably that same day. We took the elevator to the 3rd floor and waited outside the courtroom. I saw Julia before she saw me. She was sitting on a bench down the hall with a man in a suit who must have been her lawyer. She was using a cane, a wooden cane with a cushioned handle. She looked smaller than I remembered, older. She wore a cardigan and sensible shoes. When she noticed me, her expression shifted from neutral to wounded. Her lawyer put his hand on her arm and said something I couldn't hear. Melody touched my elbow and guided me toward the courtroom doors. We went inside and sat at one of the tables. Julia and her lawyer sat at the other table. The bailiff called the court to order and the judge entered. He was an older man with gray hair and reading glasses. He reviewed the file for a moment, then looked up at both tables. Julia's lawyer stood first. He explained that his client was a sick elderly woman who had taken in her orphaned niece years ago. That niece, now a successful adult, was refusing to help with basic caregiving needs, despite having the financial means to do so. The restraining order would effectively constitute elder abandonment. Julia had health issues that required family support. She'd reached out to her niece in desperation, perhaps too persistently, but only because she had no other options. Her other children were unable to help due to their own circumstances. She wasn't harassing anyone. She was asking for help from family. The judge listened without expression. Then he asked Julia's lawyer about the workplace contact, the building lobby incident, and the false APS report. The lawyer said those were misunderstandings. Julia didn't realize calling HR was inappropriate. She thought she was helping arrange medical leave. The lobby visit was because she was desperate to talk to her niece in person. The APS report was made in good faith because she genuinely believed her niece had a duty to help. Melody stood when it was our turn. She presented the timeline of Julia's escalating behavior. The 17 phone calls in 3 hours to my workplace. The 3-hour lobby sit-in where Julia told strangers I was abandoning her. The APS report that required a social worker investigation at my office. The cease and desist letter that Julia ignored by showing up at my building anyway. Then Melody introduced Sabine's written statement. She walked the judge through Julia's pattern of controlling behavior with all 3 of her children and her ex-husband. She showed that Julia's current actions fit a lifelong pattern of manipulation and control, not genuine need for family support. She presented the documentation I'd compiled about my teenage years. The schedule Julia had given me, the basement sleeping arrangement, the refusal to provide tax information for college, the fact that Julia hadn't contacted me once in 16 years until she decided she needed something from me. The judge read through everything carefully. He asked Melody about the timeline, asked how long I'd been living independently, asked about Julia's other children and why they weren't helping. Melody explained that all 3 of Julia's children had established boundaries with her due to her controlling behavior. The judge looked at Julia. He asked her directly why her own children weren't helping with her medical needs. Julia started crying. She said her children were too busy with their own lives. They didn't understand how hard things were for her. She'd sacrificed everything for them, and now they'd abandoned her. The judge asked if she'd hired any professional caregivers. Julia said she couldn't afford it. The judge asked about her pension. Julia said it barely covered her basic expenses. The judge looked back at the paperwork. He noted that Julia owned her home outright and received half her ex-husband's pension. He asked again why she hadn't hired help. Julia didn't have a good answer. The judge removed his glasses and looked at both tables. He said he'd reviewed all the evidence. Julia had engaged in a pattern of escalating harassment, including workplace disruption, false reports to protective services, and refusal to leave private property when asked. The written statement from Julia's daughter indicated a long history of controlling behavior with family members. While the judge sympathized with Julia's health challenges, that didn't give her the right to harass and manipulate family members who'd established boundaries. He granted the temporary restraining order. Julia had to stay at least 500 feet from me, my home, and my workplace. No contact through any means including phone, email, social media, or third parties. He scheduled a hearing for a permanent order in 30 days. Julia started crying harder. Her lawyer tried to comfort her, but she just kept crying. The judge was unmoved. He told Julia that any violation of the order would result in immediate legal consequences. Then he dismissed us. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt like I could breathe fully for the first time in weeks. The weight that had been sitting on my chest since Julia first called my office was gone. Melody walked beside me down the courthouse steps. She said the hearing went as well as we could have hoped. The judge clearly saw through Julia's victim act, but she warned me to stay alert. Julia might try to violate the order. Some people couldn't accept boundaries even when a court enforced them. I should document everything. Screenshot any messages, save any voicemails, call the police immediately if Julia showed up anywhere near me. I thanked Melody and drove back to my condo. I sat in my car in the parking garage for a few minutes just processing. Julia couldn't call me anymore, couldn't show up at my building, couldn't contact my workplace. I was protected, legally protected. I went upstairs and changed into comfortable clothes, made myself dinner, watched a movie, went to bed early. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night without waking up anxious. 2 days later, I got a Facebook message from an account I didn't recognize. The profile had no photo and the name was just random letters. The message said I'd broken Julia's heart, that I'd destroyed what was left of our family, that she'd given me everything and I'd thrown it back in her face, that I was cruel and ungrateful, that she hoped I could live with myself knowing I'd abandoned a sick elderly woman who'd sacrificed years of her life for me. The message went on for paragraphs. I read it twice, my hands getting colder each time. Then I took screenshots. Every single message. I opened my laptop and emailed them to Melody with a brief explanation. Melody called me back within 20 minutes. She sounded almost excited. Julia had violated the restraining order within 48 hours. Melody would file a motion for contempt of court immediately. The fake account would be easy to trace back to Julia. I asked how she could be sure it was Julia. Melody said to look at the details. The message mentioned specific things only Julia would know. The sacrifice, the years, the sick elderly woman phrasing, plus the account had been created that same day. She told me not to respond to the message. Don't engage at all. Just document everything and let her handle it legally. The contempt hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Melody said judges took restraining order violations very seriously, especially ones that happened so quickly after the order was issued. We met at the courthouse again. Julia showed up with her lawyer looking confused and defensive. The judge came in and reviewed the motion. He looked at Julia with obvious displeasure. He asked if she understood what no contact through any means meant. Julia said she thought that meant in person or by phone. She didn't realize it included social media. The judge held up the restraining order paperwork. He read aloud the phrase, no contact through any means including phone, email, social media, or third parties. He asked Julia if she understood English. Julia's lawyer tried to intervene, but the judge cut him off. He said this wasn't complicated. Julia had been ordered to have zero contact. She'd violated that order within 2 days by creating a fake social media account to send harassing messages. That showed either a complete disregard for the court's authority or an inability to control her behavior. Either way, it was unacceptable. The judge fined Julia $2,000 on the spot. He said the restraining order was now permanent. No 30-day review. No second hearing. Julia sat there frozen in her chair. Her lawyer tried to argue, but the judge cut him off. He looked directly at Julia and told her that any further violations would result in jail time. Not a warning, not another fine. Jail. He asked if she understood. Julia nodded. Her face had gone white. The judge said he wanted to hear her say it. Julia's voice came out small when she said yes, she understood. He told her she had 48 hours to comply with all terms. Stay away from me. Stay away from my home. Stay away from my workplace. No contact through any means whatsoever. He said the court would not tolerate another violation. Melody gathered her files and we walked out. Julia stayed seated. Her lawyer was talking to her, but she wasn't responding, just staring at the table. My phone rang that evening while I was making dinner. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. A male voice said my name, asked if I had a minute to talk. I said, "Who is this?" He said it was Quentin, Julia's middle kid, the one who worked retail. I sat down on my couch. He apologized right away for calling out of the blue. Said he got my number from Sabine. He wanted to apologize for his mother's behavior. I didn't know what to say. He kept talking. Said he'd kept his distance from Julia for years because she tried to control everything about his life. Criticized his job choices, his relationships, where he lived, what he wore. He'd finally had enough and moved 3 hours away. Changed his number. Only talked to her on holidays. He said watching her harass me brought back all the reasons he'd left in the first place. He thought I was doing the right thing protecting myself. I thanked him. Told him I appreciated the call. He said if I ever needed someone to verify what Julia was like, he'd be happy to help. Then he said he had to get back to work. We hung up. I sat there holding my phone for a while after. Work became my escape. I threw myself into a major project that had been sitting on the back burner during all the Julia drama. Database architecture redesign for our main product. Complex stuff that required total focus. My manager noticed. He stopped by my desk 3 days into my deep dive. Said my performance hadn't suffered despite everything going on in my personal life. That he was impressed with how I'd handled the situation. Kept it professional. Didn't let it affect my work quality. He said that took real strength. Made me feel like I was good at something again. Like I had value beyond just being someone's problem. I stayed late that week. Came in early. Lost myself in code and system design. It felt good to solve problems that had clear solutions. Unlike family stuff where nothing ever made sense. My therapy session with Carly that week focused on Julia's kids reaching out. Sabine first, now Quentin. Carly asked how I felt about it. I said confused mostly. These were people who'd called me by my first name when we lived together. Never treated me like family. Now they were supporting me against their own mother. Carly said that was significant. It meant Julia's toxicity wasn't just my perception. Her own children recognized it. Had to protect themselves from it. I wasn't alone in seeing who Julia really was. That hit me hard. I'd spent so long thinking maybe I was ungrateful. Maybe I should have been more understanding. But if Julia's own kids couldn't deal with her, maybe I wasn't the problem. Carly said I'd been a child when Julia took me in. Children don't owe adults anything for basic care, especially when that care came with exploitation. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in weeks. 3 weeks passed with no contact from Julia, no calls, no fake social media accounts, no showing up places, just silence. I started to relax, went back to my normal routine, hit the gym 4 times that week, met friends for dinner on Friday, worked on my presentation for the quarterly review. Remembered what my life was like before Julia crashed back into it. Quiet, productive, mine. I slept better, stopped checking my phone constantly, stopped looking over my shoulder in parking lots. The restraining order was working. Julia was actually staying away. I started to believe this might really be over. Then Isaiah called me from the lobby. Said Nadine was downstairs with her 3 kids. They wanted to wait for me. Was that okay? I told him I'd come down. I was curious what Nadine wanted. Plus, the kids shouldn't be punished for Julia's behavior. I took the elevator down, found Nadine sitting on the lobby couch with a toddler on her lap and 2 older kids playing on their phones. She stood up when she saw me, looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She apologized for showing up unannounced, said she tried to call but didn't have my number. I asked what was going on. She glanced at her kids, asked if we could talk somewhere private. Isaiah let us use the building's small conference room. The kids stayed in the lobby with their tablets. Nadine sat down heavily in one of the chairs, said Julia had been calling her constantly, multiple times a day, demanding help with groceries, doctor appointments, cleaning, cooking. Nadine worked 2 jobs, morning shift at a warehouse, evening shift at a diner. Her kids were in the school during the day and with a neighbor in the evenings. She barely had time to sleep. Couldn't take on Julia's needs too. But Julia wouldn't stop calling. Wouldn't accept no, kept saying Nadine owed her, that she'd raised her, given her life. Nadine looked at me with red eyes, said she wasn't asking me to help Julia. She just wanted me to understand that Julia's desperation was real. Her health issues were real. But her approach was completely wrong. Nadine said she felt trapped between knowing her mother needed help and knowing she couldn't provide it without destroying her own life. I listened to Nadine describe her situation. Single mom with 3 kids, 2 jobs that barely covered rent and food. No savings, no support system except the neighbor who watched her kids out of kindness. Julia had pushed her into having children she wasn't ready for. Told her that family was everything, that being a mother was the highest calling. Nadine had her first kid at 19, second at 21, third at 23, different fathers who all left. Now she was drowning. I saw myself in her story. Another one of Julia's victims. Someone pressured into life choices that served Julia's vision instead of their own goals. I reached into my bag and pulled out one of Melody's business cards. Told Nadine she might benefit from legal advice about establishing boundaries with Julia. Melody had helped me. Maybe she could help Nadine too. Nadine took the card, stared at it for a long moment. Then she started crying. Said thank you over and over. We went back to the lobby. She collected her kids and left. I rode the elevator back up to my condo feeling sad instead of angry. Julia's need for control had damaged all her relationships. Not just mine. Her husband left. Her kids kept their distance or struggled under her demands. She'd pushed everyone away with her manipulation. But I also felt clear about my decision. Helping Julia would mean sacrificing my own life, my career, my peace, my hard-won independence. I'd already given her 4 years as a teenager. Years I could never get back. Years that should have been about growing up normally instead of being unpaid labor. I wasn't giving her any more. She'd made choices that led to this isolation. Those weren't my choices to fix. The next morning, I got an email from my company's vice president. Subject line said, "Congratulations." I opened it. Read it twice to make sure I understood. I was promoted to principal engineer. Significant raise. Stock package that vested over 4 years. Expanded responsibilities leading a team of 12 engineers. Start date in 2 weeks. I sat at my kitchen table staring at my laptop screen. The timing felt like validation. Like the universe was confirming I'd made the right choice. Building my own life instead of returning to Julia's basement to be her caretaker. I'd worked for this promotion for 3 years. Put in the hours, led successful projects, mentored junior engineers, earned it through skill and dedication. Julia had wanted me to throw all of that away, to quit my job and take care of her like she was entitled to my entire future. I closed my laptop and made myself breakfast. Then I called my manager to accept the promotion. The team picked an Italian place downtown with white tablecloths and good wine. My manager ordered a bottle of champagne to celebrate. Everyone raised their glasses and made toasts about hard work paying off. One of the senior developers, Maria, sat next to me cutting her chicken. She leaned over between bites and said she'd been watching how I handled everything these past months. The way I stayed focused during meetings even when my phone kept buzzing. how I never let personal drama affect my code reviews or project deadlines. She said most people would have fallen apart or taken leave, but I kept showing up and doing excellent work. That took real strength. I thanked her and felt something shift inside me. Julia had spent 4 years teaching me that I was only valuable for what I could do for other people, that my worth came from serving her needs and making her life easier. But I'd built a career where people valued my skills and respected my boundaries. I handled Julia's harassment with clear thinking and professional help instead of collapsing or giving in. That was growth Julia never showed me. She always responded to problems by blaming others and demanding they fix things for her. I'd learned to solve my own problems and protect myself. The difference felt huge. 3 days later, Melody called my cell around lunch. Her voice had that careful, professional tone she used when delivering important news. Julia's lawyer had reached out about settling the invoice situation. Apparently, Julia was willing to drop her entire $73,000 demand if I agreed to drop any potential claims against her for the child labor violations. Melody said the lawyer made it sound like a generous offer, like Julia was being reasonable and trying to move past this whole thing. I sat at my desk staring at my computer screen. Part of me wanted to just agree and make everything disappear. Sign whatever papers ended this nightmare and go back to my normal life where Julia didn't exist. The temptation felt strong because I was tired of thinking about her and dealing with lawyers and watching my phone for the next horrible thing she might do. But Melody's voice got firmer when I mentioned maybe accepting. She said Julia needed to face consequences for her actions, not just have everything swept under the rug because it got inconvenient. Julia had exploited a teenager for 4 years, filed false reports with protective services, harassed me at work, violated a restraining order. None of that should just vanish because she offered to drop a fraudulent invoice she never had grounds to send in the first place. We talked for 20 minutes about options. Melody suggested a counteroffer that would actually protect me long-term. Julia drops all financial demands and agrees to permanent no contact through a legally binding agreement. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue criminal or civil claims related to my teenage years and her household. That way, Julia faced real consequences through the agreement, and I got guaranteed protection going forward. Julia's lawyer responded within a day. The speed surprised me. Julia would sign a legally binding agreement to never contact me again through any means. No phone calls, no emails, no social media, no showing up at my building or workplace, no third-party contact through mutual acquaintances. Complete separation. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue criminal or civil claims related to my teenage years in her household. Melody reviewed the proposed agreement and said it was solid. Enforceable in court with clear penalties if Julia violated it. We could add a few clauses about financial penalties for violations and attorney fee recovery, then it would be ready to finalize. I asked Melody to add those clauses and move forward. The whole process took less than a week from initial offer to final agreement. Melody scheduled a signing appointment at her office for the following Tuesday. I took a long lunch break and drove to her building downtown. The office had big windows overlooking the city and comfortable chairs in the conference room. Melody laid out the agreement on the table with little sticky tabs marking where I needed to initial and sign. I read through it one more time even though we'd reviewed it twice already. Every clause about no contact and violations and penalties. The part where Julia acknowledged the agreement was voluntary and made with full understanding. The section about it being binding on both parties and enforceable in any court. I picked up the pen and signed my name on 4 different pages. Melody witnessed my signature and dated each page. She said she'd send the executed copy to Julia's lawyer today, and we should have Julia's signed version back within 48 hours. Then it would be done. Sitting in that conference room, I felt a strange sense of closure. This wasn't the dramatic confrontation I might have fantasized about sometimes. Julia wouldn't apologize or admit what she'd done wrong. She wouldn't acknowledge the 4 years of exploitation or the recent harassment. There would be no moment where she finally understood and felt sorry. But the agreement was clean and final and protected me going forward. That mattered more than any apology. I met with Carly 2 days later for my regular therapy session. We'd been working together for a few months now, processing everything about Julia and my childhood and the recent harassment. I told Carly about the legal agreement and how it felt both satisfying and empty at the same time. She nodded and asked what I meant by empty. I explained that part of me had wanted some kind of emotional resolution, an acknowledgement from Julia about what she'd done. Maybe even an apology, though I knew that was unrealistic. Instead, I got a legal document that said we'd never speak again. Carly leaned forward in her chair and said something that stuck with me. Legal closure and emotional closure are different things. I could have one without the other. The legal agreement protected me and ended Julia's ability to harass me. That was valuable and important. But it didn't give me emotional resolution because Julia would never understand what she did wrong or apologize sincerely. She'd probably tell people I was ungrateful and mean for the rest of her life. And I needed to be okay with that. I sat with those words for a minute. Then I realized I was okay with it. Julia's understanding wasn't required for me to move forward with my life. Her apology wasn't necessary for me to heal from what she'd done. I'd built a good life despite her, not because of her. I had a career I loved and friends and my own condo and money in the bank. I'd achieved all of that by leaving her house and never looking back. The legal agreement just formalized what I'd already done emotionally. I didn't need Julia's validation or remorse to know I'd made the right choices. I used 3 vacation days and booked a flight to Iceland. I'd wanted to go for years but kept putting it off because of work or money or just never getting around to it. Now felt like the right time to do something purely for myself. The flight left on a Friday morning and I landed in Reykjavik that evening. I rented a car and drove to a small hotel outside the city. The landscape looked nothing like home. Black volcanic rock and green moss and mountains in the distance. I spent the weekend driving around looking at waterfalls and hot springs and tiny towns with colorful houses. On Sunday, I hiked to a waterfall called Seljalandsfoss that you could walk behind. I stood there with water crashing down in front of me and mist soaking my jacket. Tourists took photos and couples posed for selfies. I just stood still and breathed. For the first time since Julia called my office 2 months ago, I felt completely free from her influence. She couldn't reach me here, couldn't call or show up or send lawyers. I was standing in front of a waterfall in Iceland doing exactly what I wanted with my life. Julia had tried to trap me back in her basement serving her needs. Instead, I was traveling the world with money I'd earned and freedom I'd fought for. The contrast felt perfect. When I got back from vacation, I had about 40 emails waiting at work and a voicemail from Sabine. I called her back that evening while unpacking my suitcase. She said she'd heard through Quentin that Julia hired a home health aide using her pension money. Apparently, the legal fees and fines from violating the restraining order had scared her into finding actual solutions, rather than trying to guilt-trip family members. The aide came 3 times a week to help with medications and light housework and driving to appointments. Julia was managing her diabetes better with proper support. Sabine said Julia complained constantly about the cost and how she shouldn't have to pay for help when she had family. But she was paying for it anyway because she didn't have other options anymore. I felt a small sense of satisfaction hearing that. Not because Julia was struggling, but because she'd finally accepted reality. She needed help and had to pay for it like everyone else. Her children weren't obligated to sacrifice their lives for her convenience. I wasn't obligated to give up my career because she'd taken me in as a teenager. She'd made choices that led to this isolation, and now she was dealing with the consequences. That felt fair. Work picked up significantly after I got back from Iceland. My manager assigned me to lead a high-profile project that could define the next phase of my career. We were developing a new platform for data processing that would serve millions of users. I'd be managing a team of 8 engineers and reporting directly to the VP. The project had a tight timeline and high visibility with executives. Exactly the kind of challenge I'd been working toward for years. I threw myself into planning and team meetings and architecture decisions. The work felt good, challenging but manageable. I was grateful that Julia's harassment hadn't derailed my professional trajectory. It could have if I'd let it consume me. If I'd spent months fighting with her or trying to make her understand or feeling guilty about my choices. Instead, I'd handled it quickly with legal help and moved on. My career kept advancing because I'd protected it by protecting myself. 6 months after Julia's initial phone call, I woke up on a Saturday morning and made coffee in my kitchen. Sunlight came through the windows. I had no plans except maybe going to the gym later and meeting a friend for dinner. I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee and laptop checking emails and reading news. Then I realized I hadn't thought about Julia in days, maybe even a week. She used to occupy my mind constantly. Every phone call made me tense, wondering if it was her. Every notification on my computer made me worried she'd found a new way to contact me. I'd spent months with this constant low-level anxiety running in the background of everything I did. Now it was gone. The absence felt like a gift I'd given myself by standing firm. By hiring Melody and getting the restraining order and signing the legal agreement. By refusing to sacrifice my life for Julia's convenience. I'd protected my peace and my career and my independence. The anxiety had lifted because I'd dealt with the threat instead of hoping it would go away on its own. I sat there drinking my coffee feeling grateful for that clarity. For understanding that standing up for myself wasn't selfish or mean. It was necessary and healthy and exactly what I needed to do. A week after getting back from Iceland, Sabine sent me a text. Her birthday was coming up and she wanted to have dinner with family. The message said she'd love if I could come. I stared at my phone for a while thinking about it. Part of me wanted to say no because family gatherings always meant stress and obligation. But Sabine wasn't Julia. She'd supported me through everything. She'd given a statement to help with the restraining order. She'd chosen to maintain a relationship with me separate from her mother. I texted back that I'd be there. The dinner was at a restaurant downtown on a Saturday evening. I showed up 15 minutes early because I was nervous. Sabine arrived with her husband and 2 kids. Her husband shook my hand and introduced himself. The kids were shy at first, but warmed up when I asked about school. Quentin came next with his girlfriend. She smiled and said she'd heard so much about the family situation. We all sat down at a big table and ordered food. The conversation flowed easily. Sabine's husband talked about his job at the hospital. Quentin's girlfriend worked in marketing and had funny stories about difficult clients. The kids showed me games on their tablets. We laughed about random things, shared stories about growing up, talked about movies and travel plans. It felt normal, like actual family interaction without the weight of Julia's control hanging over everything. Nobody mentioned Julia until dessert came. Sabine said Nadine couldn't make it because she was working a double shift. Then her phone buzzed and she checked it. A group text from Nadine appeared on the screen. Sabine read it out loud. Nadine was thanking me for the lawyer recommendation. Apparently, Melody had a colleague who specialized in family law. That lawyer helped Nadine set up legal boundaries with Julia. Limits on how much money Julia could demand. Limits on how often she could call. Limits on what she could ask Nadine to do. Nadine said it changed everything. She finally had protection from her mother's constant demands. I felt something shift inside me hearing that. My stand against Julia hadn't just protected me. It created space for her other children to set their own boundaries. They'd watched me refuse to sacrifice my life for Julia's convenience. That gave them permission to do the same. We were all healthier for it. All better off for not letting Julia's need for control run our lives. The dinner ended late. Everyone hugged goodbye in the parking lot. Sabine's kids asked when they'd see me again. I promised to come to their soccer game next month. Driving home, I felt good, connected, like I'd reclaimed something Julia tried to take from me. Family didn't have to mean obligation and exploitation. It could mean people who chose to be in your life. People who respected your boundaries. People who wanted you around because they liked you, not because they needed something from you. The next week, I had my regular appointment with Carly. We'd been meeting weekly for months now, working through everything with Julia, processing the childhood exploitation, handling the recent harassment, building healthy coping strategies. I sat down in her office and told her about Sabine's birthday dinner, how good it felt to have normal family interaction, how my boundaries with Julia helped her kids set their own. Carly listened and nodded. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. She thought we should talk about ending therapy. Not stopping completely, but moving to monthly check-ins instead of weekly sessions. I'd processed most of the immediate trauma, developed healthy ways to handle stress, built a support system, learned to recognize and enforce boundaries. The work we'd been doing was reaching a natural conclusion point. I felt surprised at first. Therapy had become part of my routine, a safe place to talk through difficult things. But then I realized Carly was right. I wasn't coming to sessions in crisis anymore. I was coming to report on how well things were going. That was progress. Evidence that I was genuinely healing. We agreed to move to monthly sessions starting next month. I left her office feeling proud of how far I'd come. 6 months ago, Julia's phone call had sent me into panic mode. Now I had legal protection, healthy boundaries, and real family connections. I'd built a life that Julia couldn't touch. At work, my manager pulled me aside after a team meeting. The company was expanding our mentorship program for junior engineers. They wanted someone experienced to work with new hires who came from difficult backgrounds, someone who understood what it was like to build a career without family support. She asked if I'd be interested. I said yes immediately. 2 weeks later, I met my first mentee. She was 23, fresh out of college with a computer science degree. Talented at coding, but nervous about everything else. During our first coffee meeting, she told me about her family. Parents who didn't understand her career choice, pressure to move back home and work at the family business, guilt about pursuing her own path. I recognized everything she was saying. That exact conflict between obligation and independence. I shared parts of my story. Not all the details about Julia, but enough to show I understood. I told her that building your own life wasn't selfish, that family obligation shouldn't trap you in situations that limit your potential, that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is choose yourself. She listened carefully, asked questions, seemed relieved to talk to someone who got it. We met every 2 weeks after that. I helped her navigate office politics, gave advice on handling difficult project assignments, talked through her guilt about disappointing her parents, watched her confidence grow as she realized she could succeed on her own terms. The mentoring relationship became important to both of us. She needed guidance from someone who'd been through similar struggles. I needed to feel like my difficult experiences had purpose beyond just surviving them. I was paying forward the support my high school guidance counselor gave me. That counselor helped me file as an independent student when Julia refused to provide tax information, helped me find scholarships and navigate college applications, gave me hope that I could build a different life. Now I was doing the same thing for someone else, helping another person navigate difficult family dynamics while building their career. It gave me a sense of purpose that went beyond my own success. My achievements weren't just about escaping Julia anymore. They were about showing others that escape was possible, that you could build something meaningful even without family support, that your worth wasn't determined by where you came from. 3 months later, I got an email from my alma mater. They were hosting a panel about women in tech and wanted me to participate. The event was in 2 weeks. I'd be talking about my career path and answering questions from current students. The university was in the same city where Julia lived. I hadn't been back since I graduated 12 years ago. My first instinct was to say no. Being that close to Julia felt risky even with the restraining order in place. But then I stopped myself. Julia couldn't control where I went anymore. I had legal protection. I'd built a life she couldn't touch. The fact that I was afraid to return to that city meant she still had power over me. I replied to the email accepting the invitation, booked a flight and hotel, prepared talking points about my career, told myself this was about the students, not about Julia. I could handle being in the same city as her for 24 hours. The panel took place on a Friday evening in the engineering building. 5 women sat on stage talking about our experiences in tech. The auditorium was packed with students. We each gave a short presentation about our career paths. Then the moderator opened it up for questions. Students asked about interview strategies, work-life balance, dealing with difficult coworkers, imposter syndrome. I answered honestly about my experiences, talked about working multiple jobs through college, starting at entry level and working my way up, finding mentors who believed in me, building confidence through small successes. After the panel ended, students came up to talk one-on-one. Most wanted advice about specific companies or job hunting strategies. Then a young woman approached looking nervous. She said she had a question about family. Her parents wanted her to pursue medical school, but she loved computer science. They were threatening to cut her off financially if she didn't switch majors. She didn't know what to do. I recognized that exact situation, that pressure to sacrifice what you want for what your family demands. I told her about choosing my own direction despite opposition, about my guidance counselor helping me find a way forward, about building a career that belonged to me, not to someone else's vision of what I should be. She listened carefully, said my story gave her hope, asked if we could stay in touch. I gave her my email and told her to reach out anytime. Walking back to my hotel, I felt good about the panel, about being able to help that student, about returning to this city without fear. The next morning, I had a few hours before my flight. I drove around the city on my way to the airport, past the university campus where I'd studied, past the library where I'd worked, past neighborhoods I remembered from 12 years ago. Then I drove past Julia's street, not down it, just past the intersection. I could see her house from the corner. Same house where I'd slept in the basement. Same house where I'd worked as unpaid labor. I felt curious about whether she was managing okay with her health aid, whether her diabetes was under control, whether she'd accepted that her children weren't coming back to take care of her. But I didn't feel guilty, didn't feel angry, didn't feel obligated to check on her. The absence of those feelings was the truest measure of my healing. Julia was a person who existed in the world, someone I used to know, someone who'd made choices that damaged our relationship beyond repair. But she wasn't my responsibility anymore. I kept driving toward the airport, left that city behind, flew home to my own life. The Monday after I got back, someone from the Diversity and Inclusion Committee stopped by my desk. She asked if I had time for a quick chat about a new program they wanted to start. I followed her to a conference room where 2 other people sat waiting. They explained they wanted to create a mentorship program for employees who came from tough backgrounds or didn't have traditional family support. They'd heard through the grapevine that I might understand what that was like. I didn't ask who told them. Probably someone in HR who knew about the Julia situation. They wanted to know if I'd help develop the program structure and maybe mentor a few people once it launched. I said yes without thinking too hard about it. The idea of turning what Julia did to me into something useful felt right. We spent the next few weeks building out the framework. What kind of support did people actually need? How would we match mentors with mentees? What topics should we cover? I pushed hard for practical stuff like navigating company politics without family connections, building professional networks from scratch, and handling guilt when family members don't understand your career choices. 3 months later, the program launched with 12 mentor-mentee pairs. I got matched with 3 people. The first was a guy in his 20s whose parents kicked him out for being gay. The second was a woman whose family expected her to send money home every month and didn't understand why she couldn't afford it. The third was fresh out of college with no family at all after aging out of foster care. Our first group meeting felt awkward. None of us knew exactly what to say. But then the foster care kid asked how I dealt with people at work asking about my family during holidays, and suddenly we were all talking. I told them about learning to say my parents passed away without my voice shaking, about finding friends who'd invite me for Thanksgiving without making it weird, about building a life where holidays didn't feel like reminders of what I didn't have. The woman dealing with family money pressure asked how I handled the guilt. I was honest. I told her it never fully goes away, but you learn to separate what you actually owe from what people try to make you think you owe. That helping family shouldn't mean destroying yourself financially. That saying no gets easier with practice even when it feels terrible at first. We met every other week after that. Sometimes we talked about work stuff like projects and promotions. Sometimes we talked about the hard parts like family members who didn't understand or friends who couldn't relate. I found myself looking forward to those meetings in ways my regular work didn't always provide. Helping them figure out their paths felt more satisfying than solving technical problems. A few weeks into the mentorship program, my phone buzzed with a text from Sabine. She said Julia's health had improved a lot since getting proper medical care. Apparently, Julia hadn't been taking her diabetes medication consistently before all this happened. She'd been skipping doses and not checking her blood sugar regularly. With the health aide making sure she stayed on track, her numbers were way better. The desperate medical emergency Julia had described when she first called me had been somewhat exaggerated. I wasn't surprised. Julia had always been dramatic when she wanted something, but knowing her health crisis wasn't as serious as she'd claimed made me feel better about my decision not to drop everything. I hadn't abandoned someone who was actually dying. I'd refused to enable someone who wanted to control me. I forwarded the text to Carly during our monthly check-in session. She pointed out that this was exactly the kind of manipulation Julia had used my whole life. Creating fake urgency to make me feel like I had no choice. Making me think everything would fall apart without me. I'd finally learned to see through it. That spring, I went to a tech conference in Austin. The second day, during a panel about engineering leadership, I noticed someone in the audience asking really good questions. After the panel ended, we both headed to the coffee station at the same time. She introduced herself and we started talking about the session. Within 5 minutes, we'd moved on to complaining about workplace politics and discussing our current projects. Her name was Rebecca, and she worked at a different tech company doing similar work to mine. We grabbed lunch together and kept talking. At some point, she mentioned being estranged from her family and the relief she felt building a life on her own terms. I told her I understood that completely. We exchanged numbers and agreed to stay in touch. Over the next few months, we texted regularly and met up when we could. She lived 2 hours away, so it wasn't constant, but we made it work. Dating felt different with someone who got it. She didn't push me to explain my family situation or suggest I should try to reconcile with Julia. She understood that some relationships are better left behind. I found myself telling her things I usually kept private. About the basement and the schedule and feeling like unpaid labor. About Julia showing up at my building and the restraining order and the legal settlement. Rebecca listened without judgment. She shared her own story about parents who'd wanted her to be someone she wasn't, and the freedom she'd found in walking away. The relationship developed slowly and naturally. No pressure or expectations. Just two people who understood each other building something together. One morning in late summer, I realized it had been exactly 1 year since Julia first called my office. I was getting ready for work when the date clicked in my brain. A year ago, I'd been completely blindsided by her demands, shocked that she'd had the nerve to ask me to give up my life for her after everything she'd done. Now I was in such a different place emotionally that it felt like remembering something that happened to someone else. I'd gone from reactive and defensive to confident and clear about my boundaries. I had a support system I'd built on purpose instead of just hoping family would show up. I had legal protection and professional success, and a relationship with someone who saw me as an equal. Julia's manipulation hadn't destroyed me. It had pushed me to finally deal with all the unresolved stuff from my teenage years and come out stronger. That fall, my company announced promotions. My manager called me into her office looking pleased. They were promoting me to senior principal engineer with expanded responsibilities. I'd be leading a team of 8 engineers on a major infrastructure project. The role came with a significant raise and more stock options. But what excited me most was the chance to lead people. My manager said she'd chosen me partly because of the mentorship program. She'd heard from other managers that my mentees were thriving, and she thought I had a natural ability to help people grow while pushing them to do their best work. I understood what it was like to work your way up without advantages, she said, and that made me a better leader. My first week in the new role, I met with each team member individually. I told them I valued their growth and well-being as much as their technical output, that I wanted to know about their career goals and help them get there, that I'd always be honest with them about their performance and opportunities. Several of them looked surprised that a senior leader was talking to them like actual people instead of resources to manage. Around the same time, Sabine texted asking if Quentin and I wanted to have dinner at her place. She said it was time we started acting like actual family, instead of people who only connected through Julia drama. I said yes immediately. Quentin agreed too. The dinner was surprisingly normal and fun. We cooked together in Sabine's kitchen and talked about our jobs and relationships and random stuff. Her kids ran around being loud and chaotic. Quentin told funny stories about terrible customers at his retail job. I talked about the mentorship program and my promotion. At one point, Quentin joked that we were the family we chose instead of the one we were born into. Sabine raised her wine glass in agreement. It felt true and good. We decided to make it a regular thing. First Friday of every month, rotating houses. No Julia talk unless absolutely necessary. Just us building the sibling relationships we'd never really had growing up. That winter, I started seriously house hunting. My condo had been perfect for years, but I wanted more space. A yard, a real home office, a guest room for when Rebecca stayed over. I looked at places in neighborhoods I'd always admired, but never thought I could afford. Found a house I loved in an area full of trees and quiet streets. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a finished basement that was actually a basement and not a dungeon. Hardwood floors and big windows and a kitchen with enough counter space to actually cook. The basement had carpet and drywall and proper heating. A real bedroom down there with a closet and everything. The contrast to Julia's unfinished basement with my mattress on the floor couldn't be more obvious. I put in an offer and it got accepted. Moving day felt significant in ways I hadn't expected. This wasn't just a new house. It was proof of everything I'd built starting from nothing. Julia had given me a basement and a schedule and years of unpaid labor. I'd turned that into a 6-figure salary and a leadership role and a house I owned outright. Standing in my new living room surrounded by boxes, I felt proud of myself in a way I rarely allowed. Meanwhile, my mentees were hitting their own milestones. The guy whose parents kicked him out got promoted to senior developer. The woman dealing with family money pressure set firm boundaries with her relatives and stuck to them even when they got angry. The foster care kid presented at a company-wide meeting and crushed it. They'd all grown more confident over the months we'd been meeting, more willing to advocate for themselves and take up space. During one of our group sessions, the foster care kid said something that stuck with me. He said watching me succeed after everything Julia did made him believe he could build something real too. That my example showed him that having a terrible start didn't mean you were stuck there forever. I realized that Julia's exploitation had taught me resilience and self-reliance in ways she never intended. The pain had shaped me into someone who could survive anything and help others do the same. That didn't make what she did okay. But it meant something good had come from it anyway. 2 years after everything got settled legally, Sabine texted me one afternoon while I was in a meeting. Julia's health aide had quit that morning without notice, and apparently Julia asked Sabine if she thought I might reconsider helping out. Sabine told her about the no-contact agreement and reminded her that ship had sailed years ago. I read the text during a break and felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no anxiety, no urge to fix Julia's problems. Just mild curiosity about whether she'd find another aide quickly. That absence of emotional reaction told me more about my healing than any therapy session could have. I'd completely moved on from Julia's grip on my life. Work was going incredibly well, and I'd been promoted twice more since the legal drama ended. My team had grown to 15 engineers, and I loved mentoring them through technical challenges and career decisions. My relationship with the person I'd met at the tech conference had deepened into something real and stable. We'd been together for over a year, and they understood my past without making it define who I was. The monthly dinners with Sabine and Quentin had become one of my favorite traditions, and we'd started including their kids in some of them. We'd built the sibling relationships we never had growing up, choosing each other as family instead of being stuck with obligation. My mentorship program at work had expanded to include over 30 mentees across different departments, and seeing them succeed made me feel like Julia's exploitation had accidentally taught me something valuable about resilience. One evening, my partner brought up the idea of moving in together while we were cooking dinner at their place. They'd been looking at houses with extra space for a home office, and they wanted to know if I'd be interested in the house hunting together. I realized I was ready for that step, ready to build a home with someone who saw me as an equal partner. Someone who valued my opinions and contributions, who shared responsibilities naturally, who never made me feel like I owed them for basic kindness. The healthy relationship felt like proof that I'd broken the cycle Julia tried to trap me in. Looking back on everything that happened, I'm grateful I stood my ground and refused to sacrifice my life for Julia's convenience. She got 4 years of my teenage life as free labor, and that was more than enough payment for a basement mattress and leftover food. Now I'm living the life I worked hard to create, surrounded by people who value me for who I am, rather than what I can do for them. My success isn't despite Julia's exploitation, but it's definitely not because of it either. I built this life myself, starting from nothing, and nobody can take that away from me.